monsters. So glad you could join us for today's episode. These weekly episodes also serve as weekly meetings for our very own true crime cult.
That's right. We started a cult so that all of our spooky friends have a place to go for non-stop creepy content. But never fear, you've landed in the cult with all the adorable baby goats and none of the police standoffs.
In case you're just joining us for the very first time today, allow us to introduce ourselves. I'm Angelina, and I'm here with my bewitching BFF, Aurora. How's your week going?
I am doing great. Great enough.
Excellent.
How about you?
I'm holding on. I'm getting through that weird limbo part of winter. We've been dumped on continuously on snow, so I'm just hiding inside and waiting for it to go away.
Spring must be around the corner because I just feel this urge for braiding hair in flower crowns. So it must be on the way.
It's true. I've been feeling it too. I've been we should get out into a field and just light a campfire. Feels like s'mores time. Feels
s'mores.
Yeah. Feels like, tending to baby goats and in the sunshine. Yes. We're almost there.
Yes. I'm sure the baby goats are also marshmallow fans.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's fun to imagine yourself as an honorary cult member as you listen to our show. But if you'd like to make it official, you can join the MMN commune on Patreon. You'll find us at patreon.com/murdernews. To show how much we appreciate your monthly pledge, we will give you a shout out on the show, your own official title like Grandmaster of Goats, and you'll have exclusive access to our special patron-only content like our monthly special video episodes. Tune in at the end of February to hear a sinister spin on Valentine's Day.
Let's kick things off with some of the true crime stories that made headlines this week. This week, there was a big break in the 70-year-old Babes in the Woods case in Vancouver. For our Canadian listeners, you're probably familiar with the story about two young boys having been found murdered in Stanley Park in Vancouver. Their remains were discovered on January 14th, 1953, and a nearby hatchet was believed to have been the murder weapon. Investigators were finally able to use familial DNA from the boys' skulls and find a distant relative of the two children living in a Vancouver suburb. The boys have now been identified as Derek and David Dalton. The kids were likely descendants of Russian immigrants who came to Canada at the turn of the 20th century. They lived in Vancouver and had a family member who lived near the entrance to Stanley Park. Authorities believe the person who killed the brothers was likely a close relative who died approximately 25 years ago.
Another cold case appears to have been resolved this week as there was an arrest in the 1984 murder of aspiring model Mary Jane Thompson. Mary Jane was just 21 years old when she was found strangled with her leg warmers behind a warehouse in Dallas, Texas. Almost 38 years to the day her body was found. Police arrested 60-year-old Edward Morgan in connection with her murder. Mary Jane was last seen at a medical clinic in Dallas on February 11th, 1984. Her body was found 2 days later. It's believed that police may have connected Edward to the murder based on a DNA match from evidence left at the scene.
We'll be right back after a quick commercial break.
Hey, I'm Courtney.
And I'm Amanda.
And this is a Nefarious Nightmare.
We cover true crime and the paranormal.
Weird, twisty, and spooky things that are sure to make you think, cry, or laugh.
We have had a few wonderful guests, such as a paranormal investigator, a really cool podcast, and Jason Vukovic and his sister.
We've also had a ton of humorous moments, and we intend to have more. I come packing the dad jokes. Well, puns. I come with puns abound.
We raise awareness about the senseless acts committed against victims while roasting serial killers and marshmallows around a Zoom bonfire.
Our listeners are definitely the best, and we are their biggest fans.
So join us. Come on in. All are welcome, and let's dive into these cases.
You can find us on any podcast platform and YouTube. Be sure to find us, hit subscribe, and share us with your friends.
We do have great life advice, such as don't be a Richard.
Yes, and wear deodorant. We don't wish to smell you.
All are welcome to a nefarious nightmare.
And we're back. Now, before we get into our story, we just want to say that while our tone is light in the intro, we do take the topics we're discussing very seriously. We are best buds, and we love chatting together every week and turning it into a podcast. We want to share that passion with you and to create a vibe where all of you feel like our best buds too. We joke about us friends forming a cult or commune, but that's not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, which we do occasionally talk about in our weekly stories. We feel it's important to open up and talk about even the darkest aspects of humanity and the downright scary things that come up in the news. But we want to make it clear that our intention is never to sensationalize, and we always try to deliver these stories with respect to all parties involved or affected by the crimes we discuss.
We always post our sources in the episode description, so you can do some digging on your own if a story we present piques your interest. But you should know that if you ever feel we get it wrong, either in our tone or in the details of the case, we want to hear about it. We are more than happy to make a correction or give an update on a case we've discussed in previous episodes. So feel free to reach out to us at murdermurdernews@gmail.com.
Some specific trigger warnings for this episode include homophobia, sexual assault, and racial discrimination. If any of those are particularly sensitive subjects for you, feel free to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
Today in true crime history, serial killer Juan Vallejo Corona, known as the Machete Murderer, is believed to have started his killing spree with the murders of between 1 to 4 of his victims in 1971. If you haven't heard of Juan Corona before, you're not alone. But after murdering at least 25 men in Yuba City, California, he was America's most prolific serial killer at the time and still remains California's most prolific serial killer to this day. We were a bit shocked that we hadn't ever heard of him, especially because his killings took place during what is sometimes referred to as the golden age of serial killers, and in California nonetheless. Our sources for today include a great episode of Fruit Loops Pod, Wicked Gay, Wikipedia, Murderpedia, the New York Times, Deviation Diaries, and more. See our show notes for a full list of sources. Let's start with a little background on Juan. Juan was born in Aztlán, Jalisco, Mexico on February 7th, 1934. In 1944, Juan's half-brother, Natividad Corona, moved to Marysville, California for work, which was just across the Feather River from Yuba. Around the time that Bracero program began in the U.S., which was an executive order permitting millions of Mexican men to work legally in the United States on short-term labor contracts. The point of the program was to assist in a natural agricultural labor shortage due to World War II and to provide protections for braceros, or manual laborers in English, promising decent living conditions in labor camps, such as adequate shelter, food, and sanitation, as well as a minimum wage pay of 30 cents an hour, which I did forget to look at what that would be in today's terms. I'm so sorry.
Probably not enough. That's all I can say.
Yes, I'm sure it's not. And these agreements addressed the agricultural labor shortage and attempted to address previous Depression-era deportations and discrimination against Mexican Americans who were U.S. citizens. Definitely check out the Fruit Loops pod, which again, we have linked for a more in-depth talk about the Braceros program, which I found to be super interesting.
At the age of 16, Juan moved to the U.S. and worked picking carrots and melons in the Imperial Valley. In May of 1953, Natividad invited Juan to join him, and he moved to Yuba, working at a local ranch. He married his first wife, Gabriela Hermosillo, on October 24th in Reno, Nevada, but their marriage quickly fell apart after a few months. On December 24th of 1955, a levee on the Feather River broke, causing a 21-foot wall of water to flood the surrounding areas. The flood resulted in 74 deaths, 40,000 evacuations, and damaged over 100,000 acres of land. This had a big impact on Juan. He became convinced that those around him were ghosts who died in the flood, and Natividad checked him into the DeWitt State Hospital on January 17, 1956, where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. The hospital administered 23 shock treatments over the next few months, then pronounced him recovered and released him. Soon after, he was deported back to Mexico. In 1959, he married Gloria Moreno, and the two had 4 daughters. In 1962, Juan returned to the U.S. with his family, having gotten his green card. He was known for being hardworking, having a violent temper, and being super homophobic. He gave up drinking around this time and intensified his devotion to the Catholic Church. It's said that he went to Mass 3 times a week and said the rosary with his family every night, which, according to other Catholics who have written or spoken about Juan, saying the rosary every night would be a very long and intense process.
With his return to California, Juan became a licensed labor contractor, which meant it was his job to help local fruit farmers find workers for their farms. Meanwhile, let's take a look at Juan's half-brother, Natividad. Natividad was doing well for himself and had opened his own restaurant, the Guadalajara Cafe. The restaurant/saloon is one of Marysville's oldest landmarks and was built in 1851. As another aside, Marysville is one of the oldest cities in California and was named after Mary Murphy, a survivor of the Donner Party.
Wow.
Super creepy.
Mm-hmm.
The cafe was originally built as a hotel, then converted to a brothel, and Juan operated it as a cafe in the 60s into the early 70s. It sounds like it was likely a cafe and maybe a bar downstairs and a brothel upstairs, though I couldn't get confirmation of that. But it seems that the brothel operated as the last remaining brothel in California until 1972, which would have been during the time when he owned it. The place is still open to this day as a Silver Dollar Saloon and is said to be super haunted.
Wow. The more we dig into this, the more surprised I am that we haven't heard of it, because there's so much, it's so deeply sewn into the history of America and things we know that that's really fascinating.
Absolutely.
So Natividad owned the cafe and Juan would often come to hang out. From what we've read, he would just kind of sit there alone. He didn't drink and he would just sit and people watch by himself and sometimes try and recruit farm workers. Early in the morning on February 25th, 1970, Jose Romero Rea was attacked at the Guadalajara Cafe. Accounts of what happened that night vary and have possibly been sensationalized because of homophobia in the media at the time, in part because Natividad was gay, but also open about his sexuality in a time where it was illegal in the U.S. According to Jose, Natividad had come on to him and he had rejected his advances. Jose also talked to Juan that night about doing some pruning work at nearby Sullivan Ranch. Jose said he didn't know where Sullivan Ranch was, and Juan offered to drive him to the farm in his truck that night. Just stick a pin in Sullivan Ranch for now, because we'll come back to that later. Jose didn't end up going with Juan and doesn't remember what happened next. He was found in the bathroom at 1 a.m. by another customer with bloody gashes all over his head, and his lips being slashed so badly they had nearly been cut off, and he was left for dead.
Well, Jose didn't remember who attacked him. He believed it was Natividad, or it was at the very least Natividad's fault since it was his cafe. Jose sued him and won $250,000 in damages against him. Natividad then fled back to Mexico, leaving the lawsuit unpaid. In March of 1970, Juan was once again committed to the DeWitt State Hospital and subjected to electroshock treatment. Over the next year, Juan took a financial hit. Technology was putting many farm workers out of business, and Juan was having a harder time placing workers. He applied for welfare, but was denied because he owned 2 houses and had more money in the bank than allowed to qualify. Then, on May 19th, 1971, a Japanese-American farmer made an interesting discovery. He found a freshly dug hole while walking around his peach orchard. The hole was pretty big, at 7 feet long and 3.5 feet deep. At first, he thought someone was perhaps taking a soil sample, but the hole seemed too big for that. He asked his workers, and they didn't seem to know anything about it either. He worried that someone might try to bury trash on his land, so he decided to keep an eye on the hole. When he returned to the spot later that evening, he found it had been filled and looked eerily like a grave. He called the police, who came to take a look the next morning.
In the hole, police found the body of 40-year-old Kenneth Whitaker. Kenneth was a native Californian and he had previously been in the Air Force as a master sergeant. Before starting farm work, he had been a truck driver for a phone company, but he had a hard time finding work after a series of arrests for robberies in the 1960s. His sister described him as being good-looking, with no shortage of attention from girls when he was younger. He'd been staying at a hotel in Marysville and working odd jobs to pay for his place, including part-time as a farmer. Kenneth had been stabbed in the chest, and the back of his head had been split open with what appeared to be a machete or heavy knife. Newspapers at the time reported that gay pornography had been found in the back pocket of his pants, and some reports said that he had been raped. And other sources said he wasn't even examined for sexual assault at all. There's a lot to unpack with these details because many modern stories point out that these details were never presented in court. The media may have been trying to sensationalize the case at the time, but there's also a chance that there was a sexual component to the crimes, and if Kenneth was sexually assaulted, they were not brought up in court because of homophobia at the time.
4 days later, workers on Sullivan Ranch, that should ring a bell, noticed sunken ground and had heard about Kenneth's body being found. They too called the police, and a body was found at the dig site. And from there, they just kept finding suspicious areas of land and digging and finding more bodies. Altogether, the bodies of 25 men were found on the farms, mostly at Sullivan's Ranch. 4 of the victims have never been identified, but they're all believed to have been transient workers who had been working at nearby farms. They all had deep puncture wounds to the chest, and their heads and faces have been slashed with either a machete or heavy knife, just like Kenneth. One of them had also been shot. The victims had also been posed in their graves, having been buried face up with their arms above their heads and their shirts pulled up. Some of them were buried with their pants pulled down, though again, there was no mention of sexual assault by investigators. Not a ton of information is available about the victims, but we want to thank a great site, Deviation Diaries, for putting together a list of the known victims with as much information as they could pull together about each of them.
John Joseph Chaluka was 52 years old, from New Jersey. He was known for being street smart, and he liked traveling from place to place by train. He generally worked around town in avocado groves and is believed to have been murdered sometime between February 25th and May 11th in 1971.
William Emery Kemp was 62 years old from Minnesota. He had been working regularly at a place called the Day Center, where he had a few friends and was known for being very religious. He had been sober for years and would read the Bible to others at the day camp, and also an area known as Wino Park. He came up missing on January 23rd, but is believed to have been murdered between February 26th and May 12th. He was the only victim to have been shot in the head, along with the other similar wounds of the other victims.
Clarence Hawking was 53, from Illinois. He moved to California in 1962 and was known to travel up and down California. He was last seen getting picked up in a truck for farm work in the area. He was likely murdered between February 26th and May 12th.
Albert Leon Scratchy Hayes was 58 from Pennsylvania. He moved to California by freight train. He was known for wearing a red hat that had the name Scratchy written across it. He was well-liked and would travel up and down the West Coast for work from Oregon to California. His red hard hat was found near his grave, and he was likely killed between February 27th and May 13th.
Sigurd E. Pete Byerman was 62 years old. Pete had lived in Marysville for 20 years and frequented Wino Park at the time. His wife had passed away after a long illness, and his friend Robert said he was one of the best guys he ever knew. Robert was with Pete when he went missing on March 26th or 27th. He saw a man he believed to be Juan pick up Pete in his truck for work, and he never saw him again. It's believed he died shortly thereafter.
Warren Jerome Kelly was 62 years old from Texas. He loved tattoos and had several. He'd been on the road since the 1940s and had left his wife Ruby behind. It is believed he was murdered around March 30th.
Joseph J. Maxick was 54 years old from Illinois. He was born on St. Patrick's Day and had a lucky horseshoe tattooed on his forearm. He was likely killed around April 26th to May 21st.
Mark Beverly Shields was 56 and a native Californian. He was in the Army during World War II, and his life after the war was tough for him. He started drinking and wandering around from place to place taking odd jobs. It's believed he was murdered around April 28th to May 15th.
Donald Dale Red Smith was 60 years old from Kansas. Red started wandering from job to job in the area after high school. He loved the Yuba City area more than any place else he'd been. He was known for being gentle-natured. He was killed around April 30th to May 11th.
James Wiley Howard was 64 years old from New Mexico. He generally kept to himself and moved between Marysville and Sacramento quite a bit. He died between May 1st and May 13th.
John Henry Jackson was 64 years old from New York. He had served in the Army in World War II, and he'd been abandoned at an orphanage as a baby. He worked on a farm with Jewish people who didn't speak English, so John taught them English in exchange for them teaching him Yiddish. On May 3rd or 4th, a witness saw John was hired by a man, thought to be Juan, to work at a local farm. It's believed he died shortly thereafter.
Sam Bonafide was 55 years old from Washington State. He also went by the name Joe Carriot and seemed to use both identities. He was a hard worker and had quite a bit of money saved up in his bank account at the time of his death. His murder took place around May 6th.
Edward Martin Cupp was 43 years old from Missouri. He worked various jobs, including roofing and farm work. He had a hard time finding work after deserting the Army. He was likely killed between May 9th and May 13th.
Charles Levy Fleming was 67 years old from Louisiana. He was a World War II vet and was likely murdered on or around May 11th.
Jonah Raggio Smallwood was 56 from Tennessee. Jonah was a father to 7, but he struggled with the pressure of family life. He left his wife and children and was working in California. He died on or around May 12th.
Elbert J.T. Riley was 45 from Arkansas. He was friends with 2 of the other victims, Jonah Smallwood and Paul Allen. He also had a family prior to his trip to California, but found family life to be a challenge. He liked to keep on the move. He was murdered on or around May 12th.
Lloyd Wallace Wenzel was 62 from South Dakota. Lloyd had just arrived in Marysville 2 weeks earlier and is believed to have been killed between May 14th and 22nd.
Paul Buell Allen was 59 from Arkansas. Paul was hit by a car when he was 15, and his brother thought it had affected him, and things took a turn after. He started drinking around that time, and he had just recently arrived in Marysville and is believed to have been murdered around May 15th.
Raymond Rayond Muchache was 47 from California, and he was from the Maidu tribe. He was known to wander around the area, but never stayed far from California. He was murdered on May 18th.
Melford Everett Sample was 59 from Nebraska. Melford had separated from his wife and moved to Yuba City 22 years earlier. He was murdered on or around May 21st. As we mentioned, there are 4 other victims that have never been identified. The victims were all murdered within 6 weeks of each other, which means Juan would have had to commit an average of 1 murder every 40 hours.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The murders were quickly tied to Juan as 2 meat receipts signed by him were found in a grave. In 2 other graves, there were Bank of America deposit slips printed with Juan's name and address. It almost seems like such an obvious mistake that one might think Juan was being framed for the murders, which that thought has crossed my mind. However, there were witnesses that identified Juan as the man who had picked up several of the victims in his truck, as we mentioned.
It almost sounds like, the shock treatments that he'd endured didn't cure his schizophrenia, but
Right.
Maybe they did make him a little sloppier when it came to
That's a good
organizing
point.
things like murder. Yeah.
That is a very good point. Yeah.
Wow. We'll be right back.
One of the reasons why I've always been attracted to true crime is that I spend a lot of time processing the worst thing that can happen and kind of planning my escape route if I were to be abducted or find myself on a scary Tinder date. But sometimes I get true crime overload, which leads me to setting up booby traps around my apartment, like I'm Kevin McAllister, self-medicating with wine, and struggling with falling asleep.
I'm so glad that we talk about therapy so much in this community, and I've learned so much about cognitive behavior therapy from the work I've done and how I can use those tools to calm down when my mind is racing or imagining there could be a serial killer hiding in my closet. We've been using this great app, Nuna, that uses CBT methods in this cool chat function, which helps me get a hold of my thoughts and feel like a friend is helping talk me back to a more reasonable state of mind.
You can try Nuna right now to help with your mental well-being and get 25% off when you use our link to sign up. Just go to landing.nuna.ai/MMN or just click on the link in our show notes for your 25% discount.
Let Nuna help convince you that the noise you heard outside your door is probably just your cat up to their usual hijinks. And we're back. On May 26, 1971, police searched Juan's home and found 2 bloodstained knives, a machete, a pistol, bloodstained clothing, and a work ledger that included the names of 34 workers with dates listed after the names. 8 of the victims' names were included in the work ledger. Some sources state that the dates listed next to the names of the victims were likely the dates of their murders, so this piece of evidence was especially important. Police believed at the time that the other names in the book could have been tied to other victims they had not yet located. Juan was then arrested and charged with the murders of the 25 men. Juan was assigned a public defender who immediately went to work to seek an insanity plea due to his schizophrenia diagnosis. But then Juan was approached by a private defense attorney, Richard Hawk. Richard did not have Juan's best interest at heart, and he offered to represent him in exchange for exclusive literary and dramatic property rights to his life story, including his trial. Under the agreement, Juan waived the attorney-client privilege. If it's not immediately obvious why this was a bad idea, one can only imagine that Juan's life story was more valuable if he was found guilty of being the most prolific serial killer at the time than if he was found innocent. This was a major conflict of interest.
After taking over Juan's defense, Richard decided against using the insanity plea and did not have Juan assessed by psychiatrists. Juan maintained his innocence throughout the trial and was never called to testify. In fact, his attorney called exactly 0 witnesses to testify for Juan.
Wow.
Big conflict of interest. Like, what in the world? His trial began on September 11th, 1972, and lasted for about 3 months. The jury deliberated for 45 hours and finally returned a guilty verdict for all 25 murders on January 18th, 1973. Juan was sentenced to 25 consecutive life sentences with the possibility of parole after only 7 years. The death penalty would have likely been considered for Juan, but in February of 1972, the California Supreme Court found the death penalty constituted cruel and unusual punishment under the California state constitution, and 107 condemned inmates were resentenced to life with the possibility of parole and removed from California's death row. The death penalty was reinstated in California in November of 1978, so just 6 years later, after a proposition was approved by voters. The last person on death row to be executed in California was Clarence Ray Allen in 2006. While serving his sentence in Vacaville, Juan accidentally bumped into a fellow inmate and did not say, "Excuse me." 3 inmates attacked Juan in his cell as a result, stabbing him 32 times. Juan survived the attack, but lost his left eye in the process.
Ouch.
Yeah.
4 years later, in May of 1978, Juan's conviction was overturned by an appeals court who upheld a petition by his new defense attorney, Terrence Hallinan, claiming his original legal team had been incompetent because Hawk did not put forward an insanity plea, even considering Juan's diagnosed schizophrenia. The second trial began on February 22nd, 1982. This time, his defense team focused on his half-brother, Natividad. Their argument was basically that the murders appeared to have been of a sexual nature and that it was possible that the men had been raped before their murders. Because Natividad was gay, it must have been him who had killed the men. This argument did not hold much weight, since there was evidence that Natividad had fled Mexico after the lawsuit at the Guadalajara Cafe, which was almost a year before the murders began. This time, over 50 witnesses were called, including Juan, who again maintained his innocence. Jose Romero Rea also testified about having met Juan on the evening of his attack at the Guadalajara Cafe, and that Juan had offered to drive him to Sullivan Ranch that evening. It was also brought up in court that Juan was not contracted by Sullivan Ranch, nor was he working at the ranch when he offered Jose a job. Jose's name appeared in Juan's ledger with the date of the attack next to it.
The jury deliberated for 54 hours this time and again came back with a guilty verdict. The foreman later told the press that the most damning piece of evidence was the work ledger, which has since been referred to as the death ledger. As we mentioned, the ledger just contained names and dates that closely corresponded to the estimated dates of murders for the 8 victims, plus the date of Jose's attack. Generally, a work ledger would have included more information such as amounts paid and potential work locations for the workers, and start and stop dates, not just the one date. Juan allegedly did admit to the killings twice, but both confessions were a little confusing and really didn't offer a motive for why he did what he did. He once told a Mexican consulate employee that he had a sexual encounter with a man in Mexico and told him in Spanish, quote, "Yes, I did it, but I am a sick man, and a sick man can't be judged by the same standards as other men." Sources have mentioned that the tense Juan used in Spanish can be a little unclear, though, and that his word choice could have meant, like, quote, "if I did it," and simply not "I did it." So it didn't necessarily mean it was an actual confession.
OJ style.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah, a little confusing. And at a parole hearing in 2011, when asked if he knew why he was in prison, he responded, well, and again, this is a quote, "Well, I commit all those dead persons 25. When asked why he had killed them, he referred to the victims as winos and creeps who had been trespassing.
The prosecution teams never offered a motive for why Juan killed the farm workers, and there's been a lot of speculation over the years. Of course, many have pointed out that serial killers tend to have a sexual motive for their crimes. There was never any evidence of sexual assault presented in court, but we already mentioned that investigators never inspected the victims for signs of sexual trauma. If the pants of some of the men were actually pulled down when they were buried, that could potentially indicate a sexual motive. There is also the fact that we know Juan was incredibly homophobic. Having been raised in a toxic machismo culture, it's possible Juan didn't feel comfortable living his life as a gay man, and his outward homophobia was a way of him masking his sexual identity. Juan was denied parole 8 times and passed away from natural causes on March 4th, 2019. Wow, that's epic.
Yeah, it's a really big, epic case. And again, it's like so shocking to me that I've never heard about this. Like, and it's not that far from like Sacramento, and like we know like so many serial killers have come from Sacramento around this time. So it's just like incredibly shocking to me that I've never heard of this.
It's really like probably a product of the times. Like the reason that like we would have probably heard about it or looked into it or picked it up if there had been more speculation in court about motive, if there had been more like looked into in terms of whether they had sexual trauma or other traumas that weren't presented in court. Like if they had presented the case as, say, he was very homophobic and it was sexual attacks, like we probably would have heard of it. But like each little sort of nuance that's removed in court, like we haven't heard of it because it's just generic now. It's like a guy killed a bunch of guys. We have no other info. And
I think the fact that the victims were, first of all, like men, I think those cases don't get as much attention as women victims, but also because these men were often like transients, and a lot of them like moving from job to job that didn't have families to kind of advocate for them.
And a lot of them could have been gay, which as well, you know,
True. Yeah,
there's the
that's definitely a
prejudice. Like
possibility.
we mentioned a lot of people who had left their families. I mean, I think that in the earlier gay community, that was pretty common as well, like to have a family and then realize you're gay, like well into adulthood and move on from there.
Very valid point. True.
So have you been watching anything worth mentioning this week?
You know, I really did not watch anything. This is really exciting, and I'll hopefully be able to post some like video clips and stuff from this when we get closer to the show's release. But the TV show my husband's working on, I got to be a featured extra for this past weekend.
Exciting. An extra that you're not going to miss. Like,
right. And like, I guess I could talk about it since everybody doesn't know what the show is, but I like the episode that I'm in involves like human trafficking. And so I'm supposed to be like a trafficked person that's like on display at an auction.
Wow.
So like in lingerie, whatever. So I've been exercising every day and getting facials.
Your whole life has led to this moment.
Right. And like, not to be like ageist, but like everybody else that was in the scene with me was like in their 20s and I'm up there like twice their age. And I was like, please make my skin look pretty and young.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was spent all weekend doing that. So I didn't have a lot of time for TV watching, unfortunately.
I mean, that's probably a positive for you. It's negative for those that are looking for something to watch and have no leads on what would be interesting. But it's nice that for once in the span of the pandemic, you didn't spend the weekend trying to find cool TV shows to watch. You actually had shit to
watching
do.
TV in bed.
Yeah, that sounds a lot more positive. So we cannot wait to see this, and I can't wait to hear more and more about it. But sounds
and
like
once the show's released, I will post a ton of like behind the scenes, like photos and such. And it was so great because like little trigger warning here on maybe like disordered eating. And I don't mean for this to sound like this, but skip ahead 30 seconds if that's an issue. But I have like a gluten intolerance. And so when I eat gluten,
you get bloated.
As of endometriosis, and it causes like my belly to really swell. So I was trying to not have that going on like for the episode. So for the past week, I just went back to gluten-free, which is healthier for me anyways. Like I know I feel better when I'm not having that issue and feel
not nice
like bloated
to feel
and whatever
bloated either. That's actually the worst part of it.
Yeah. So, but I was like really missing, like they have a lot of great like pizza places and stuff here in Dubrovnik where I am. So knowing that everything would be closed when we wrapped, because our wrap time was estimated to be around 2 a.m., my husband got me a pizza. Like this like big pizza for myself, or like as soon as I was done, I was just gonna like sit and eat this pizza.
You ate an entire pizza to celebrate.
And yeah, so like he has this picture of me with like my like big hair and like makeup and lingerie and a robe, sitting with the pizza in my lap, just like stuffing it in my face.
Glamorous.
And like the picture is so great. Approximately 30 seconds later, like in my exhaustion, I like shifted to move the box and I dumped the entire pizza on the ground, vegan cheese down first.
Did you cry? I would have cried at that point.
I just sat and stared at it. Like I couldn't even pick it up. Like I'm like holding my, like what's left of like the piece that I was eating.
You're holding
and just
a soggy
down
piece
at
of
the
bread and you're like, Yeah, that's sad.
It was terrible. But what are you watching and what should I be watching this weekend?
I don't know either. Unfortunately, this sucks. We're both on the same like train of just no recommendations. I just wrapped up all the things that we've been talking about. I finished Dexter. I got caught up on After Party. I guess there's still a couple of episodes that will come out. So that'll be cool.
I think I'm like one episode behind. Maybe that's what I'll do today.
It's a good episode, the last one that's there at the moment. So definitely recommend checking that out. And we'll keep an eye on the rest of it because, I'm excited to see how it pans out. But otherwise, I've got not too much to talk about in terms of new shows. So help us out. Recommend some stuff to us.
Yeah.
All of you out there listening to creepy shows, watching creepy shows, fill us in and we'll watch them. Well, I guess that's enough murder for 1 week, but maybe this week you're feeling like you need just a little bit more murder. You can always find us on the OG murder.news for the latest breaking true crime news articles every day of the week.
You can also find us on Instagram at Murder News, on TikTok at Murder News, where this week we dug into murder history to talk about the murder of Kenzie Hauk, for which her 11-year-old stepson was initially charged. You can find us on Twitter at Murder News. And on Facebook, you'll find our page by searching for Murder News.
And if you search for Murder News on Facebook, our little group should also pop up. You'll want to join us to stay in the loop about any upcoming virtual events and to RSVP to our next book club meeting on February 27th. We're reading We Keep the Dead Close by Becky Cooper.
And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you enjoyed today's episode. Reviews are so important if we want to keep this podcast alive and to keep creating creepy content catered to your interests.
Have an amazing week.
Bye, friends.
Bye.